Okay, welcome to Pit Lane News. I'm Matthew Jordan. I have the honour today of welcoming Mark Preston, who's a team principal from DS Techeetah. Welcome, Mark. How are you and where are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you for getting to talk to you today. Yeah, I'm here in Rome. We're getting ready for the next two races here. The track's looking very interesting. I think you've probably seen they've got a bit different track from previous seasons.
Yes, I
but yeah,
noticed.
sitting in Rome, getting ready for the next two races. We're going to have a double header here now for this weekend.
What's the weather like?
It's nice and sunny. It's sort of going to be about 20, 22 degrees today, I think.
Great. Well, obviously, for those that don't have been living on perhaps on the moon, you're the team principal of DS Techeetah. I believe you've been with them for the last 3 years, from day one, correct?
Yeah, I started one of the teams in the first year of Formula E, and then we became Techeetah in season 3.
Because I've just checked their stats. They were champions last year and the year before, but then they changed. They changed the powertrain?
Yeah, so we've had 3 drivers' championships. So 2 with Jev, 1 with Antonio, and 2 teams championships with DS Automobiles, who joined us in season 5. So we won season 5 with them and season 6, both titles. So we got both titles. So we're the reigning champions in both of the titles as we go into being a world championship this year.
Are the plans to win it again this year?
Of course, yeah. I think if you know the format of Formula E, it's probably worth sort of going into a tiny bit of detail. The thing that keeps Formula E, or one of the things that keeps Formula E so topsy-turvy and makes it interesting, is the qualifying format, where if you're at the top of the championship, you go out in the first group in qualifying. And if you've got a lot of track evolution, which we did in Saudi, and we believe will be the same here in Rome, then you're more severely penalized unless you can get yourself out of the Group 1, which that is a feat, but it's also part of winning the championship. So both Jev and Antonio got reasonably good at getting themselves out of Group 1 enough times during the year, and then winning when they got out of Group 1 and into Super Pole, and then hopefully pole position, which they've done in the past number of times. That's the kind of secret to winning a championship for a driver.
Brilliant. Well, it makes it exciting as well. Now, obviously, again, checking on your history, you moved to the UK, I believe, in '96 from Australia.
Yeah, that's right.
To chase your F1 career. How was F1 back then? How was your move? Well, before, excuse me, I'm jumping the gun here. Before F1, tell us a bit about motorsports in Australia, because obviously I've never been on. I have some clients mark cars and stuff, but is it? I know that American motorsports is a world apart from European motorsports. How is it in Australia? Is it very much similar, or is it the same sort of concept?
So in Australia, the big thing is touring cars, V8 supercars. That's the big series that is hugely popular. The big race over in Australia is Bathurst 1000.
Yes.
That's like the Le Mans of or the Indy 500 of Australia. Australians are big into motorsport. Nowadays, the Supercar Championship travels right around Australia up to Darwin and other places. And then there's a number of support series around that. I was involved in Formula Fords because I was interested in designing race cars. And the only manufacturer in Australia of race cars, actual race cars that would be sold overseas, was a company called Ball and Racing Developments. Right. And I started helping them while I was at university. And over the next 6 or 7 years, we built our own new car, which it was the Spectrum. And in fact, that car is still winning races in the Walter Hayes Trophy over here in the UK now. So those cars are still sold around the world, Spectrums in Formula Ford. So I did Formula Fords for a number of years. And then I was at a race in Sydney, and one of the journalists came up to me and said, "How old are you again?" And I said, "Turning 27 in 3 months' time." And they said, "You know that you can get on a working visa to go to the UK if you leave now." Oh, and really? So within 1 month, I went home and said, "I think I might be going to England." And I was going for 2 weeks or 2 years, and now 25 years later, still here. So Formula Fords was what I did mostly in Australia, and a little bit of touring cars.
So when you came to England in '96, was it a difficult stage to get into F1, or was it quite simple? I presume with your background and the cars doing well, they were obviously couldn't wait to get hold of you, I imagine.
Well, I've actually came over and made sure I had 10 interviews over the 2 weeks.
Right.
So everyone from McLaren to Lola to Arrows to other teams, and it turned out that Tom Walkinshaw had just bought Arrows Grand Prix, and I worked for his other company in Australia called
Right.
Holden Special Vehicles. So when I came over, I gave my CV to his one of his guys, and they put it on the table at Arrows in Leafield, and I had an interview, and it just so happened that as they transferred over from being the Jackie Oliver owned Arrows to being TWR owned Arrows, they needed a stress engineer, and they said, okay, we've got a job offer, and so within that 2 weeks I got a job offer from Arrows, and off I went.
And they were based in Oxfordshire as well?
Yeah, so that's in Leafield, in the technical centre just outside of Oxford, where Caterham was for a while, and where later we were with Super Aguri.
Brilliant. And how was F1 back then? Was that a? It's exciting now. But I got into F1 as a child when I was 7 or 8. So this is back in the 80s. But it just seemed a different era back in the 90s for some reason.
I think as an engineer, I think the big, a lot of young engineers say, should I go to F1, etc. What should I do? When I came from Australia, where really there was only 2 of us designing these Formula Fords, you can only learn at a certain rate. Yeah. So there's 2 of you, so you've got a restriction on how much you can learn. When I came to F1, it was like a whole world opened up to me, because we had 320 people, and that, imagine going from 2 people to 320 people. I think I spent every waking hour walking around talking to people and say, how's this work? How does that work? How does this work? And because you're learning from such a bigger group of people, I was just taking in information for at least 2 years at least.
Human sponge.
Yeah, basically. And I think so the difference between back then and to now is that it's just even bigger and more specialized. So what you find in motorsport is that as a team gets sort of bigger and more successful, at least in the bigger series where there's more resources, you get more specialism. So people get to have to specialize more nowadays. So I think the difference from let's call it the old days, and I would even talk to some of the guys from the sort of 80s and early 90s, the further back you go, the more you would have had to do. But now the opposite is true.
Back then there was an F1 engineer as a job title. Now there's 40 job titles for specializing CAD CAM. Which is great.
But we know more. We know more nowadays. So I suppose the trade-off is, if you went and asked somebody back in 82, how does a tire work? They probably wouldn't be able to tell you. They'd have a lot of theories. But now, coming fast forward to now, you say, well, on the simulator, we have all the tire models and all the tire information. And so that you, as an engineer, you can probably learn faster now. Yeah. But at the same time, back then, you had to figure it out yourself.
Brilliant. Well, which is it's a good thing, I suppose, in a way. How was the move, or when was the move from F1 on normal motorsports towards the electric side? Because and was that move was it a conscious decision in regards to the environment, or was it a business move? Because obviously the whole world now, I've just a minute ago, I've just been speaking to the safe thing on YouTube with Ag and all the guys and Lucas, and there is a social responsibility involved as well. But was that part of your decision to move to FE?
So when, sadly, we ran Super Aguri Formula One team with Honda for a couple of years, 2.5 years, we had to close that down because Honda pulled out of Formula One about that time, about sort of 2008. That was when the financial crash happened. Yeah. So I actually stopped for a minute and said, okay, just like I'd done when I came to England, the sort of 10 or so years previous, I wanted to look at what I felt was the future of motorsports. And so I sat down and did lots of reading and looking at all sorts of things. And my basic premise is that motor racing needs to be relevant to the world. Otherwise, you won't be able to attract interest, sponsors, all those things. And I started to help spin out an electric motor company out of Oxford University called Oxford Yasser Motors, which is still going. I think it's called Yasser E-Motors now. Yeah. And that meant that I had to do a lot of reading and business planning for electric motor company, which meant that I started to look at the future. And this was back 2008. So the future was unclear.
Yeah.
And I think in one of my presentations, I've got that picture of that. I think it's called the I Thrust something on the Top Gear. Do you remember that car they built they made a at home electric car?
Yes. Yeah.
That's what people thought about electric cars back then. Fast forward to now, you think, oh, a lot's changed. But then you also realize it's 12, 14 years later. So it wasn't quick. So to take a long story short, I was looking at what I felt was the future of of vehicles, let's say, and it seemed to be electric vehicles were the next big thing. So I started to get involved, and I started to talk to the FIA, and then I got invited to be part of the tender to the FIA for the race cars, which would later on become Formula E. Obviously, Alejandro was also working on it, but had a bigger vision, a bigger plan. And when he started it, then we said, could we join? And again, we brought Guri Suzuki. We were looking to see if we could get Honda involved, but they were quite busy with Formula One at the time. So then we moved on and worked with Renault, and now with DS Automobiles. So I was probably a little bit too early. You read a lot about how Alejandro says that in season 1, things got pretty tight for the series and everybody, but he pushed through, and obviously it's become incredibly successful. But I think that's an example of it is really difficult to be at the start of something.
Yeah, of course. But if you stick it out, I think it's definitely. I think the public are starting to. There are a lot of people out there, and I do get a little bit angry sometimes with some people. There are the petrol heads. Oh yeah, but I love, which is great, and I understand that, and the smell, and it's brilliant. But at the end of the day, it's the driver in a vehicle doing. You can't. It's a bit of ignorance, to be honest. Oh yeah, I like the sound of a roaring engine, but if you compare what's happening to the planet, I've just recently seen. I don't know if you've seen it. The film called Seaspiracy on Netflix.
No, I haven't. No.
And I knew that the seas were in a bit of a mess, but this is shocking. It's shocking. So it's the same with with the veganism. People, I hate vegans. You can't really hate somebody for not wanting to kill an animal. That's what I mean. But
I think that
go on. Sorry.
One of the ways of answering maybe your first part of your question is, now that we've been going for 6 years, if you imagine that you were, let's say, 12 years old when Formula E started, and you happened to come across it because you were watching your Facebooks and all that sort of stuff, you're in a different than your dad who was, say, watching Formula One. You wanted to find your own thing. You might have come across Formula E and started to get involved, but now you're, so 6 years on, you're 18 years old. You're now, you've left high school, you're maybe going on to do engineering or something of that ilk. And so we're actually getting a whole different audience because we've been around 6 years, and it seems like the younger audience who don't remember V8 supercars, or maybe didn't watch Formula One, of course, in the 80s or 90s because they weren't born yet. They potentially see Formula E as a whole different world, because they say, well, what are you talking about? Really noisy V8s, they're noisy. When a young person comes to a motor race, they can't believe how noisy the cars are. Now, I'm probably a bit deaf after being around, petrol-powered racing cars for so many years. I think as a person who comes to a very noisy Formula One race, they are blown away by how noisy it is. But then they come to a Formula E race, and there will be a lot of people that say, have said to us, actually, I can bring my 2-year-old, my 4-year-old, my 8-year-old.
There you go,
So
without any headphones and protection and stuff.
So then you grow up with a different group of fans that maybe still like to watch Formula One with their dad. Because the average age of Formula One viewer is up in sort of 40 plus, although Drive to Survive is probably changing that, getting a whole new audience. But our audience is probably sort of the 18 to 34-year-olds is stronger than maybe F1 is.
100%. And also as well, the work that these guys are doing as well on the side to help climate change as well, which is, you can't ignore it. You can ignore it. People do ignore it, but it's still there. You see,
our cars are we're being Techeetah, Techeetah. We have the word cheetah in our name, so we do some stuff with the Big Cat Sanctuary in Kent. and each one of our cars has a name of a cheetah
Yeah.
on the vehicle. So yeah, we're trying to encourage the knowledge that people have about what's going on in the world, and think more about. I mean, clean air is the big one for me, because you see those photos. One thing that COVID has sort of highlighted is clean air is something you can touch and feel. Some cities, I mean, London, I suppose, as well. You can notice the difference in London. But if you're in a, sorry, somebody tried to call me. So start again there.
Well, Luke Browning.
Yeah, it's how do I stop that? I'm on my iPad and someone trying to call me on Teams. Yeah, so I think we're getting a big audience.
Right, and it is as well. Where do you see, obviously, as somebody who's done a lot of motorsports from an early age, and F1 and motors and electric, where do you see motorsport going in the future, in general?
I mean, the question, of course, I always get asked, because I'm one of the few people that, let's say, ran a team in Formula One and also now in Formula E. It's really interesting. I think that Formula One will naturally go to more and more electrification. So the one thing you've got to remember is that Formula E actually was helped to start by Formula One. So because Formula One was doing KERS, was in 2009.
Yeah.
The first Formula E cars used a lot of technology from Formula One. So the battery knowledge that Williams had to do the first battery in Formula E came from their knowledge learning in Formula One KERS. So actually, it all started way back in probably 2007 or something, when I remember us looking at KERS in Formula One. And then that obviously became sort of got to work. 2009, the KERS started. So then by the time we started Formula E in 2014, Williams and McLaren had learned a lot about electric powertrains. And so McLaren provided the motor, and Williams did the battery, and McLaren ECU. And so actually what's happened is we've taken on the technology that Formula One developed. And as you know, McLaren currently does the battery. Williams has got the battery for the next generation. I think Williams is doing the battery for Extreme E. So the Formula One teams are still intertwined with us. I think they will just take bigger and bigger electrical parts of the hybrid system. So their current motor will get more and more powerful. I mean, me as an engineer, I'd like to see us from the point of view of what's the best for an electrical car or cars of the future. I'd like to see four-wheel drive regeneration. So the next version of the Formula E car will have 350 kilowatts rear motor, but that can also regenerate.
So it hasn't got to stop and rechange. Brilliant.
And then the front powertrain will also be 250 kilowatts regeneration. So the amount of energy going back into the battery in the next generation of Formula E cars is quite phenomenal. And again, to think that where we started sort of 12 years ago thinking about this and getting it all started to now, the technology jumps are pretty big, and we'll see those things come across into road cars in, I think, the very near future.
Do you think there'll ever be a chance or a time where F1 and F3 will be on a par, or even perhaps compete together, or will they will they merge as a group? I don't know, because obviously if F1 becoming more electrified and vice versa, can they both continue side by side?
That bit is probably unclear, because I was talking a couple of days ago that actually different countries have different strengths in energy. So I'm from Australia. We have a lot of coal, obviously, in Australia, but there's more and more renewables going onto the grid, and Australia is looking very heavily at hydrogen, working with Japan, because Japan has a lot of nuclear, but not a lot of other renewable capabilities. So Australia and Japan are looking at how does Australia transfer renewable energy to Japan, and that might happen through hydrogen. If Australia and Japan are doing a lot with hydrogen, then maybe hydrogen-powered cars will be more prevalent in countries where there's more of that energy. Whereas in France, for example, which is heavily nuclear, in fact, majority of their nuclear power is from nuclear, then it's logical for them to be battery electric, because they've got so much direct electricity coming from renewables. And then in the UK, I mean, it's great seeing some of the statistics over the last few days. I think it was quite windy last week and sunny over Easter.
Horrible.
Renewables were 75% of the grid, I think.
Oh, really?
So and then when we put in the UK the new wind farm in the North Sea, I think it adds another 40 gigawatts, which means that you can theoretically run the entire country renewable. So there's these really big steps happening around the world, but there'll be horses for courses in different things. And so the way that VW says, they say the fuel or the energy, it comes in a different energy carrier. So we use batteries to store our energy in Formula E. So that Extreme E, Formula One stores it in fuel. Now that fuel could be synthetic, and they may have a bigger battery as time goes on, but they may have a proper range extender in Formula One. So I can see it'll be different things.
It's definitely it's going to change. We're not quite sure exactly how.
Yeah, and I think it will be driven, as I say, as the world tries to decarbonize. How does each country decarbonize because of its strengths and weaknesses? And I mean, just to add, one more thing is, like, we've been into Uruguay, and that's got a lot of hydro. So does Tasmania in Australia. So the majority of their energy comes from hydro. But as I say, Japan doesn't have big rivers and lakes, so therefore their energy is going to come from a different source. So it will be different where you are around the world, and that will drive what happens in the different racing series, I think.
Exciting times, though, isn't it? I must admit, especially for an engineer, but for followers, and it's going to be quite exciting.
It is.
Extremely have just done their first weekend in Saudi Arabia, which was stunning to watch as well. There's still people against it, like, oh, what if there's a fire? But this is all R&D. This is all making things for the future. So I think it's exciting. One thing that I've been speaking to Lucas Di Grassi about a few times. He does, now you obviously work together on autonomous vehicles. You have a company called Street Drone, which we've spoken about in the past over the years. What about autonomous motorsports? Do you think, because maybe I'm old school, I'm an old man, I don't know, and I've watched Star Wars, I've seen the, Anakin Skywalker in the race pods. Yeah, for me, it has to have a driver.
I think I did actually help Lucas and Dennis and those guys at the beginning of Robo Race to help define what the vehicle would look like, and got it. Yeah, so I was involved in the first sort of year or so on that. I've had lots of discussions with Lucas and the guys at Robo Race about this, and they even said people do like to watch people racing, so that's still a key point. I know that they're experimenting with a lot of ideas about how to make that sort of element of it exciting. I think there's so many different things you can do, mixing humans with robots, let's say. If you look into it, when Gary Kasparov...
Do you know what? Sorry to interrupt you there. That's what I'm thinking. There's a film out with Hugh, the Australian actor, Wolverine, where it's about robots boxing. Now,
yes.
Again, I'm thinking probably 1,000 years in the future, but that's a robo car with a robot driver. That would make it a bit interesting, wouldn't it?
Well, when you think about it, so if we go into movies, when you think about Star Wars, if you remember, they'd have R2-D2 in the back, and the pilot was flying. Probably the most interesting bit in this area is Gary Kasparov. When he got beaten by Big Blue, he went and looked at his chest. So to everyone who doesn't know, that's chess. When he got beaten by the Deep Blue, I think it was, he went back and said, okay, how does this work? What's the best way of looking at this in the future? And he does a lot of talking at the moment, or speaking around the world at augmenting computers with people. And what they found was they've called it, I think it's advanced chess. And in advanced chess, it would be him playing with a computer supporting him. And then he said, I don't have to worry about the tactics. The computer deals with the tactics. I deal with the strategy. So basically what he's saying is, I'll deal with the long-term strategy stuff because there's so many permutations and combinations of the game. But then I can leave the tactics to the computer. So I can say, computer, give me the next 20 best moves. And then the computer will go, there's the next 20 best moves. And then he says, no, give me a moves that do this. And then the computer offers him up some other ideas. And then he says, we're going to take that route. And so what he's been studying is how do humans and robots work together. So yeah, Star Wars with R2-D2 in the back.
Yeah, that'll work.
Maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe.
That'll work.
So yeah.
Listen, Mark, I've taken much of your time today. Thank you very much for your time. It was much a pleasure. Have a great weekend in Rome. I was supposed to be there, but getting out of the country at the moment is proving quite difficult. But things are changing. But listen, thanks for your time. Enjoy. Are you back in the UK soon, or?
Yeah, back in the UK, of course, on Monday, but then back out to the next race in Valencia for 2 weeks later.
So can you bypass this quarantine thing, or it's part of work, isn't it? I don't know. That's
yeah,
what
we have to do.
Yeah,
we have to do a special lot of tests.
Yeah,
I mean, we have tests every 2 days when we're at the racetrack.
More money to the government. But, it'll be over soon. But listen, again, Mark, thank you very much for your time. Have a great day, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you.
Take care, mate. Thank you.